who was your favorite champ to design?
That's Apocalypse. Hands down, Apocalypse was the most favorite, most fun I've ever had on any character. And the reason why is because, one, he's a big name. I love working on the big names, Doctor Doom, Hercules, who was voted in. Any character that has got a lot of hype behind them, I love working on those. But the second thing is he's such an interesting character. Apocalypse is like this villain, but he kind of means well by some of the things he's doing, and he kind of brings people together. And having a champion that has so much lore and so much identity that you can kind of understand, and like the reasonings for being kind of a villain character is kind of understandable in some world. I find those so interesting to design. And then each of his abilities, just the way he brings mutants together with his kind of custom horseman ability and his synergies and just his impact on the overall roster. I had such a blast putting together the whole kit. And then also I did model his 4 abilities in his base kit to be mirrored after the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse. So what I mean by that, he's got 4 debuffs. He's got the concussion, he's got the poison, he's got the weakness, and all of them correlate to the different horseman effects in his comics. So like think of it as pestilence, that's why he's got a poison. Stuff like that. And there's war, that's why he's got a degen. Each of them kind of correlate to one of the abilities, and just that level of lore and putting that into a character is so much fun. And then when we released him, seeing all the positive reactions to him just made the whole package the most memorable experience I've had at Kabam.
Did you know that you were already taking a class that was really good, like maybe the best class, and then making them, I don't want to say OP, but by far the best, knowing that you could take somebody like OG Storm, who is a solid champion by her own, but not the best, but when you make her a horsewoman, as I like to call her, suddenly she's amazing. Was that part of the goal of the Apocalypse design?
Part of the goal is definitely to make mutants matter. I definitely wanted to buff some of the guys who kind of get a little bit less love. So kind of think of like Cable and Wolverine and Storm. I love to bring characters who aren't great up. That's the same thing I did with the Red Guardian and Abomination synergy as well. Just making those characters have a lot of value, I think, was important. And Apocalypse was a great candidate for it. So yes, absolutely, that was intentional.
By the way, I have to tell you this. I know this is going to sound incredibly nerdy and like I'm fanboying out, but I don't care. When you talk about creating Apocalypse, I get chills. Like just thinking about, because you impact so many people, like so many people go for a champion like that. And if they get them, if they win the Marvel Casino of Champions, as I like to call it, if RN Jesus instead of RN Judas, doesn't betray you, you might make that person love the game more for the rest of the time they play it just because the champion you designed. And that's why it's such an honor to talk to you, because you dream these things up, you put them in the game, and then you touch thousands, hundreds of thousands of people over the course of their game. So that's amazing. Like, you have such a great legacy, and Apocalypse is just one example. And so, based off of that, several people asked the same question, so I want to make sure I ask it. Can you walk us through what it's like, and I realize it might be a complicated question, to design a champion from like starting with the idea to synergies to implementation to testing?
Yes, absolutely. So the process is definitely a bit in depth. I'll try not to spend too much time on it, but I think it's very important that players understand how it works, because I think it'll give better understanding of why champions might end up the way they do. So the first thing to understand is that not every time we run through this process, we have the same amount of capacity. So designers go out, they're sick, maybe a designer's on vacation, any number of things can happen that limits the capacity we have. But in a perfect world, we'll start off the process by assigning characters. So we get these many months in advance. We have our leads basically sit down with producers and talk with Marvel about upcoming movies, what's going to be releasing in the MCU, what's a character that players want, what do we want for the MCOC lore, that kind of stuff. And we come up with the characters for the next couple of years. So like at this point, we've had characters talked about all the way to the end of 2022. Obviously, they're not locked in yet, but we start talking about them. Once we have characters more locked in, we'll assign designers to the builds. So we do 2 characters, generally 2 characters per build. And every designer will have kind of an on build and an off build. So when you have an on build, it's you and another designer, and you guys kind of just figure out who's taking what character. I like to do this just the old-fashioned way with something like rock, paper, scissors, or just Dave and Buster's, like the big game that we have MCOC on, just battle it out on the machine, or just anything you want. Just a good old office wrestle, whatever, it doesn't matter. But we figure out who's taking what character. And then once you know what character you're going to have, you kind of sit on it, because you're going to be working on other characters. The ones that you just got assigned are so far in the future that you don't actually think about them for quite a while. But you just have the idea in the back of your head that I am going to be working on this character. So you kind of you have a shower thought here and there. You might write something down just in the back of your mind. You're planning. At any given time, a champion designer will be balancing 3 to 4 characters. So there's a lot on our plates. So once you figure out kind of a general idea of what you want to do with the character, maybe some of their abilities, you'll enter the research phase where you look up what they're known for. So there's lots of resources for this. Wikipedia, Comic Vine, whatever you want to use. You're essentially doing a lot of research on what the character's known for in comics, in MCOC, movies, that kind of thing. A lot of the time they're actually different in movies and comics. And you figure out what their identity should be in contest. So you're thinking mostly about abilities at this point. Like if it's Apocalypse, what is he known for? He's known for like bringing mutants up, like making them better. He's known for being like a big ruler guy, very general things. And then we'll put together what we call a creative doc. And the creative doc will hold all that information of like what their abilities are, who the character is, because sometimes the character is not well known. And then we'll walk into our first ever meeting on the character. So this will be a couple months later. You'll have about 1 or 2 months just to think about what the character might do in the back of your mind as you're developing the other 3 characters on your plate. And then when it comes time for the first brainstorm, you'll enter that brainstorm with the creative doc, and you'll sit down with artists and animators. You'll talk about what do we want to do with this guy, mostly visually. So at this point, we're not going to know, Nick Fury is going to have bleeds. We're not going to know Apocalypse is going to have persistent charge. We're only going to know very high level things. So just to use Apocalypse as an example, when I walked into that meeting, all I knew is that Apocalypse is cool. I want him to get bigger. That's pretty much the only thing I knew. And I wanted him to feel very scary. So those are the big things I brought into that meeting. I was like, hey, animators, I want Apocalypse to be scary. How can we do that? And we kind of sit in this meeting, and the animators are like, what if his animations are really long and they're tough to dodge because he's just going to keep blasting you and blasting you? It's like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And then we come up with these ideas in that meeting of what the gameplay might look like. Now, sometimes in those meetings, we'll have more time, such as Hercules, where me and Cam sat down. We actually talked about exactly how we wanted each animation to play out, the distance of the animations, the specific abilities tied to each. That's rare. Most of the time, we just have a very general idea. So after that first meeting, that's the first brainstorm, we'll do a couple follow-up meetings with just animation reviews. So I'll start working on the paper design. Paper design means like, what are the abilities? How do I want him to play? How do I want him to change the game? Like, is he going to have a bleed? Is he going to have a poison? What does the game need? What does the character do in his lore? And as I'm building this design doc, the animators are actually making the animations. So we're kind of doing them at the same time. And then we'll have our syncs where they're called animation reviews, where we both show what we've been doing. So I'll say, oh, cool, the design, he's got a bleed, so I want him to have a claw attack somewhere. So maybe we'll adjust one of the animations to add claws or that kind of a thing. And we'll do our checkups the whole way through. And then once we're happy with the design, we'll do what we're call, once we're happy with the design, we'll do what we call a design review, where we'll take our design, our paper design, it's all theory at this point, and we'll prototype it. So we'll actually build it in the engine, start to see how things feel when they connect to the moves. And then we'll also present it to the other designers. So every other champion designer has an opportunity to give their feedback on the character's design. So, oh, this ability looks too strong. I get that a lot because I have a bit of a history of making things very powerful. But like, this looks too strong, or this looks too weak. How is this going to happen? Like, we ask a lot of questions. We try a lot of things. We try to kind of solidify the identity of the character. A lot of the times the character will start as 2 or 3 characters. Like, there's so much these guys are doing when we first brainstorm them. Like, oh, let's trim this back. This one character should probably not do this amount of things. So we'll trim back the abilities, focus the abilities on what the core character wants to be doing. And then once every designer's kind of happy, we sign off on it as a champion design team. So when a champion does flop, it's not like one person made a mistake and, oh no. It's more like the champion design team either didn't have time or something went wrong and things didn't come together the way we wanted them to. So I don't think it's a good idea to point fingers like a lot of players tend to do. It's just, it didn't work out. It doesn't always work out, right? It's hard to know until things are released. So once all the designers sign off on it, we do a team review. So people from all the different departments come in. We all talk about the implications of the kit that we've built, the kit we just talked about and brainstormed. Now everyone gets their say. And once everyone gets their say, we'll wrap it up and we'll start our playtesting phase. So playtesting is the designer builds the character's kit, and then we take it onto a device and we just play it. How does it feel? How do the abilities impact the game? What's the damage like? All these types of things. And we're not the best players of our game. We are good players. There's a lot of pretty decent players, but we're not the best. So sometimes it's hard to know, oh, cool, we built Quake. Just how strong is this Quake? Or we built Ghost. Just how strong is Ghost? Like, we think she's good, but then when it goes in the wild and we get these insane players that we have out in the community, they're going to master that character and they're going to try to exploit things. So that's why we get some of these oversights, is because we're a limited team with a limited amount of time. And then once it goes live, there's an infinite amount of time and an infinite amount of resources, right? So we're trying to get better at staying on top of that, but that is a problem we're always going to have just because of how small our team is versus how big the audience is.